Hello, welcome to Senior Speak New Hampshire. I'm Dan Wise, a volunteer for AARP, which is a sponsor for this show. But don't worry, AARP doesn't take any responsibility for anything I might say. Today is, or rather this year is a leap year, and you may have noticed that we have a presidential election coming up in November. But before you change the channel, today's guest has been stimulating discussions about democracy and elections in a really fresh way. Eve Jacobs Carnahan is a retired election law lawyer from Vermont and a fiber artist. And she's been conducting an information project since 2019, first in Vermont and now in New Hampshire, offering education on American democracy and specifically on elections and voting and how they are conducted and how they could be conducted. And she is operating in a really unique format. It's knitting circles. Eve, welcome to Senior Speak.
Thanks for having me.
Please tell us about Knit Democracy Together.
Knit Democracy Together brings together people who are interested in learning about democracy and deepens their understanding of how the electoral process works. But I wanted to make it fun, and I wanted to attract people with the activity of something that is a collaborative process, kind of as a metaphor for democracy. So in these knitting circles, along with a presentation and discussion that I lead about a topic, people are making pieces of a collaborative sculpture of the New Hampshire State House.
Mm. Now this is the Vermont State House?
This is a little piece of the sculpture that the knitting circles in Vermont made that was based on the Vermont State House. Mm-hmm. The whole Vermont State House sculpture is 5.5 feet long, 3.5 feet tall, and it wouldn't have fit on your table.
Right, right. So this is just a piece of it. And you did one of these knitting circles just last night in Laconia,
yes,
right?
I did.
And so these are these some of the pieces that came out of that?
In the hour-and-a-half circle, it's just enough time for people to knit or crochet a square that can be added to the sculpture. And these are some of the things that people made. Mm-hmm. And I want to include everybody, so I also have an activity that you don't need to know how to knit. It's a knitting spool, and since this is AARP, maybe AARP members remember doing this when they were little. I don't know if today's kids do, but really simple little activity to make a knitted cord, and we'll use this to embellish the sculpture. So all these things will go on the collaborative sculpture.
Wow, wow. And we have some sample photos from some of the past events that we'll be showing during the while we're talking. So people are knitting. You're setting them up with the materials, and you're explaining the project, and then you're talking to them about some different topics related to elections.
Right.
How does that go? How does that kind of discussion take place?
So I have two basic topics I talk about. One of them is counting the vote. Talking about all the things that happen after we cast our ballots, which most of us kind of have taken for granted in the past, but there's been lots of questions about it. So what happens to the ballots? Are they secure? What kind of machinery is used to count them? What happens with voting by mail? And one of the things about this is that states have all different rules. And that's one of the reasons we're building a state capital sculpture, because I want people to know and to appreciate the role that states have in setting a lot of rules. So for instance, New Hampshire has different rules for voting by mail than Vermont has. And both of those are different from Oregon. So once we start to appreciate and get introduced to the different rules around the country, they're not as foreign to us and we're not as suspicious of them. And then that also means that it takes a different length of time to get the results. And so it starts to help us understand why we might not have instantaneous results. And then another big part of the counting process is the Electoral College and the way that that's different from the national popular vote count. And then that introduces some questions about, could we actually have a national popular vote? And so that's one topic. And another topic that I talk about are things that really increase polarization or that can decrease polarization. So specifically, that session talks about gerrymandering and the winner-take-all primaries that we have, and the alternative, which is ranked choice voting, which can be an alternative to traditional primaries. So the sessions talk about things that happen now, things that happen in other states, and things that could be changed. And people have so many questions during the sessions and share their experiences. The first session I did in Dover, there were 2 or 3 people there who were active poll workers, and they were really eager to tell the other people in the room how the process worked, how their votes were counted, how secure it was, because they had been involved. And so it was a really nice community discussion.
How did knitting become part of this program for you?
So I've been a knitter since I was little, and I knit when I was in law school as a way to reduce stress, and I have always liked to knit. So as an adult, it was kind of a side thing to my legal career. But at a certain point, I began making knitted artwork. And then when I left my work as a lawyer and became a full-time artist, I was still using knitting. And I was aware of the craftivism movement. And that is something that combines crafting and activism, as the name suggests. And there are all sorts of variations of it. But it became clear to me that I could combine knitting and something I knew a lot about, which was the electoral process, and use the knitting as a way to make a comfortable space that people can enter. People come and they have something in common because they're all knitters. They have something they can talk to other people about, like, oh, I don't remember how to cast on. Would you show me? Oh, can I borrow your scissors? And so you just automatically get some conversation, and that provides a common basis to then have a discussion and learning about something that's a more difficult topic.
Well, you said you mentioned that you were like knitting when you were in law school. Is there something different about how, I've seen this when I was in school, that there was a friend of mine who was knitting during lectures and things like that, and she said it helped her listen better. Is that something you found to be true?
I don't really remember if I ever really dared knit in class, but it does. There's psychological research that says it does help you focus. It's because it's a repetitive, meditative process, and just as meditation helps you focus, gets rid of distractions, knitting can do that as well.
Wow. I also noticed that if you look at go to any town meeting, traditional town meeting in New Hampshire, there's 3 things you always see: guys in flannel shirts, bake sales, and there's at least several people who are knitting during the deliberative session, during the discussion and things like that. And so when I heard about this project, I thought, well, does that have any connection to that? But it's this whole thing about craftivism combines crafting and activism, is something I hadn't really ever heard about, although when I think about it, I have heard about people making AIDS quilts and things like that. And I came across, getting ready for the show, I came across a really interesting definition of craftivism. Is the intersection of crafting and activism. It involves using various forms of craft, such as knitting, sewing, embroidery, and crochet, to create handmade items with a purpose. These crafted pieces often carry messages, symbols, or stories related to a specific cause or issue. Craftivism encourages individuals to slow down, use their hands, and create something meaningful. It is a form of self-expression that can communicate powerful messages to a wider audience. Is that square with what you think of as craftivism?
It does. That has a lot of the elements that I think of in my project. And it's really actually significant that you mentioned the AIDS quilt, because that is often pointed to as one of the first things that stimulated this kind of engagement of making things with your hands, often with textiles and the comforting nature of textiles, to then also make a big social statement and draw people's attention to something.
Can you tell me, like you had just one of these events last night, what kind of folks come to it, and how is the discussion different from, you know, a panel discussion or something where everybody's sitting in chairs in rows listening to a speaker on a topic?
So it's a mixture of men and women, more women than men. There was a 9-year-old there, so I can say there was a big age range, though they tend not to always be so young. And some of the people knew each other and some of the people didn't, but there was lots of ready conversation among people. I get people going, I bring supplies and suggested instructions, though people can make any pattern they want as long as they make a 6-inch by 6-inch or larger square.
Oh, okay.
And we spend the first 10-15 minutes making sure everybody's got supplies, chatting, and getting people going. And we sat in a semicircle, and then I give a sort of like a rough 45-minute presentation interspersed with people's questions, and then have another 20, 30 minutes, whatever time there is, for discussion and questions, and ask people to share thoughts and experiences that they have. And in fact, one of the things we're doing, so this whole project is sponsored by the New Hampshire Humanities, and one of the things we're doing is when people make a piece, we're asking them to also fill out a little card where they answer a question such as, what was your most memorable voting experience?
Oh, neat.
Or
Okay.
do you participate in the electoral process in a way other than voting? Like maybe somebody will talk about being a poll worker. And we're going to take all of those cards and display them with the finished sculpture at the end of the project.
Oh, wow. Wow. What kinds of questions? Now, so yesterday you were talking about the ranked choice voting, and what kinds of questions, and were there any like, how would you contrast it with that kind of other discussion where people are kind of in a more persuasive, dialectical, adversarial
So
approach?
there was a lot of curiosity. I think that's was a feature, at least last night, especially with that presentation, that topic. So that topic is one that a lot of us are really not familiar with. I've never lived anywhere where there was ranked choice voting.
Yeah.
So I really only know about it by reading about it. But what I've learned about it is very powerful, because it has the potential to reduce the adversarial nature of campaigning, the negative nature of campaigning, because in ranked choice voting you get to choose your first choice, your second choice, and your third choice. So you can choose the person who your heart really, really wants to have win without feeling like you're wasting your vote. And then you can choose a second person who is the person I think would be okay. You know, they'd really be pretty good. And then you can say, and I could live with this third choice. So that means the candidates are then competing to be not only your first choice, but your second or third choice. So the experience of places that have used it have shown that there's less negative campaigning, because if I'm campaigning and I totally insult all the other candidates, if I've insulted your first choice candidate, you're not going to vote for me as the second choice. So I have to appeal to a wider range of people, because I'm trying to get more than just enough to get a winner take all. So it changes the campaigning, and it also means there's greater buy-in with the result, because whoever wins has gotten a majority of the votes. So anyway, last night was really interesting because someone was there who used to live in a place that did use ranked choice voting in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is actually a particular version for their city council, which is proportional voting. And I'm getting too much into the details here. But she was able to talk about the experience, both negative and positive. She actually said it meant she had to do a ton more research on the candidates, which was really difficult. So that was interesting to hear. And there were a couple other people. There was one man who really wanted to know why, since it made so much sense, didn't everybody adopt it? So we kind of talked as a group of like, well, what would be the hesitations? And I think the biggest one is that it's new and different. But there was a lot of questions and people trying to answer them across the room.
Oh, wow. So there was a lot of give and take among the audience, and so people were really speaking up.
Yeah.
Do you think that happens more in this kind of a setting than in the kind of a more traditional speaker setting?
I mean, it always depends on the speaker, but
Yeah.
I try to make it a very open, welcoming setting, as well as wanting to share my knowledge and research and experience through a presentation, but allowing as much time as I can for questions and discussion.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, and then you've also been talking about counting votes and the Electoral College, and those are kind of is it more controversial in a way sometimes?
People are very polite, so I haven't had anybody come right out and say something very disagreeable, but the presentation that I did in Dover, that knitting circle on counting votes, did have a lot of people talking about working at the polls or living in places where it was all mail-in voting. Like one of the people there, her brother lives in Oregon, they've been voting by mail, everyone voting by mail for 20 years. It's not new.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
there were anecdotes shared like that.
So, and then now, could you go over a little bit of your background in Vermont as an election law lawyer? What kind of things did you work on, and you know, was it something kind of fell in your lap, or did you choose that? How did that happen?
So I worked as a lawyer in the Vermont Attorney General's office for about 27 years. So Vermont is even smaller than New Hampshire, and so you don't get to specialize all that much in the Vermont Attorney General's office. So I did general civil litigation, which meant I defended the state when the state was sued, but I had a huge range of cases when I started out. Then in the late 1990s, the Vermont legislature decided it was going to adopt a law to restrict campaign spending and campaign contributions to candidates. And they knew that this would be a challenge to an existing Supreme Court precedent, but they wanted to do it anyway. So as soon as that law was passed and signed into law, we were sued. So I was assigned to defend the state, and that became the start of a couple decades worth of working on election law cases. Starting with that one, that particular case made its way up to the US Supreme Court. It had many spin-off cases, and then once I became the one who had done all the research and had this great base of knowledge on election law, which means constitutional law, First Amendment issues, then I began to become the one who got all the repeat cases of different variations in different ways. And that's how I developed the expertise.
Did you end up going to the Supreme Court with a case?
Well, the Attorney General, if the Attorney General of the state wants to be the one to argue the case, that's the one who argues the case. So I was part of the team helping him prepare, but our Attorney General actually was the one speaking.
Right.
So, but it was very exciting to be there and to work on the written submissions, because the speaking is a small part. There's so much written briefs that are submitted to the court.
Yeah, yeah. And So yeah, I used to work for the New Hampshire Bar Association, so I may dive into this legal stuff more than the topic merits, I guess. But I just thought that was interesting. And then meanwhile, you began doing kind of turning toward fiber art, kind of while you were still working, and then kind of dove into that full time.
Right.
In the
Right.
past few years. What can you tell us a little bit about your other work, about your own artwork?
Well, so as you might suspect, hearing me talk, my artwork also has social messages. And so while I love making beautiful things and making, using color and drawing on figurative animal scenes and things like that, most of my work involves allegorical stories about social issues, especially democracy. So for instance, I have a sculpture I made not all that long ago that's called, oh my gosh, what is it called? It's about lobbying. It's called, and it has two gulls at a, with a fancy china and a teacup that's spilling out, and under the wings of one of the gulls is some money, and under the wings of another one is some money, and there's sort of like messy food there, food that gulls might eat. So it's an allegory for the disruption that lobbyists cause to the democratic process, especially when they are passing money to people.
Passing money.
So.
Isn't there one with a bird in like a cage or something like that?
Yes.
I saw that.
So
Yep.
yes, and so that is a bird trying to escape from authoritarian strictures that the bird first didn't realize were confining, and then the bird is breaking free. And but you could also look at it and say, oh, it's a beautiful bird escaping from a cage. So I try to use the knitting both in my sculptures and in this project as the softening approach to attract people in a non-threatening way, and to say, this is approachable. We can find this appealing and attractive and have a conversation. And then if you look deeper, you might also see there's other metaphors and messages going on.
That's great. That's sort of an interesting take on art, and combining it with things that you care about and are thinking about. What is ahead with? I know that there are a couple of these knitting circles. You've done a couple of them already, and then you've got a couple coming up. There's one, because this program airs in April, beginning in April, and there's two more knitting circles. There's a website for the project called knitdemocracy.org/nh, and it'll have information about the program. There's one Thursday, April 11th in Keene, and then Thursday, April 18 in Lancaster, and they're both sort of after 5:30.
5:30 to 7. Yeah.
And then there are, this is all going to put together a version of the New Hampshire State House, or something that looks like that New Hampshire State House.
So those will be the last two presentation discussion circles in the series of 6. But then we're going to take all of the pieces that were made at all of those sessions, and we're going to meet on May 18th in Concord at the Elegant U Yarn Shop.
Right.
And we will gather people together, and people are invited to sign up for that, to come and help sew the pieces together, glue them to the armature that I'm making, and put all of the pieces of it together. And so that also is another like really, really physical embodiment of collaboration, because we will really literally be working together to create the whole, each of our small pieces going into the whole. Just
how many pieces ultimately would, like the Vermont State House, how many pieces, how many individual, do you know how many individual pieces it was?
I don't
really know?
remember. I don't remember. But enough to cover the structure.
And then there's then it gets exhibited, right? You
Right,
wanna
so
explain
it will
that?
go on exhibit at the New Hampshire State Library in Concord from June 3rd to July 3rd, and there will be a special reception on June 13th that will be combined with the New Hampshire Humanities 50th anniversary celebration.
Oh, wow.
So there'll be cake, and and there will also be the showing of the sculpture, and we also have borrowed a traveling exhibition called Who Gets to Vote? A Brief History of Voting Rights in the United States.
Oh, wow.
And so there will be the panels of that exhibition explaining some history. And on June 13th, we'll also have the showing of a film about the 26th Amendment that that's when 18-year-olds got the right to vote. So there's some people in New Hampshire, including Representative Mel Myler, who was very involved at the time when he was a young person in pushing to get the
New Hampshire
26th
to
Amendment.
ratify it,
Yes, and so he's going to be there to give a few remarks, and there'll be a showing of that film. So
Wow.
that's June 13th from 1 to 4.
Wow, so put that on your calendar, June 13th. I'm going to put that on my calendar. That sounds really interesting to see that kind of observation or that kind of discussion about voting and who votes and when they got that right to vote, because you're talking about expansion of suffrage to blacks and to women, and then the 18-year-old vote, which I think that must have been in the early 70s, because I was a beneficiary of that
Yeah.
myself, that I got to vote at 18 or 19, I think, when I was in college, and I was very proud of that. I had to vote in Chicago, and that was a very different experience. They make you vote on all of the judges, and there was a line of like, I don't know, there were 30 judges that you had to vote for. It was
Oh my gosh.
It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Very
Well,
strange.
We could have a whole nother session about the judiciary and whether it's a good idea to have elected judges or not.
Yes.
Another project.
Yes, that's another project, right? New Hampshire, I don't know about Vermont, but in New Hampshire, judges are appointed, and there's no
Yes.
elective component to that
Yeah.
at the present time. But anyway, so we've got those events coming up, and I think I'm really glad you brought this project here to talk about it with us, and I encourage people to visit the website knitdemocracy.org/nh to find out more about the upcoming events, and to find out more about your work, and to maybe check it out when it's in Concord again, all pulled together. And so thank you again for coming,
Thank you
Eve.
for having me.
It was it was very interesting, and I wish you the best of luck. And we are going to wrap up. The one last thing I want to do is encourage and viewers of the show, if you have any ideas for future shows, I'm open to them. And there is an email address, nh@aarp.org, where you can send your ideas for future programs. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.